God, I'm full of so much gratitude right now. And I do not feel elevated above any of my fellow nominees or anyone in this room because we share the same love, the love of film. And this form of expression has given me the most extraordinary life. I don't know what I'd be without it. But I think the greatest gift that it's given me, and many of us in this room, is the opportunity to use our voice for the voiceless. I've been thinking a lot about some of the distressing issues that we are facing collectively. And I think at times we feel, or we're made to feel, that we champion different causes. But for me, I see commonality. I think whether we're talking about gender inequality or racism or queer rights or indigenous rights or animal rights, we're talking about the fight against injustice. We're talking about the fight against the belief that one nation, one people, one race, one gender, or one species has the right to dominate, control, and use and exploit another with impunity. I think that we've become very disconnected from the natural world, and many of us, what we're guilty of is an egocentric worldview, the belief that we're the center of the universe. We go into the natural world and we plunder it for its resources. We feel entitled to artificially inseminate a cow, and when she gives birth, we steal her baby, even though her cries of anguish are unmistakable. And then we take her milk that's intended for a calf, and we put it in our coffee and our cereal. And I think we fear the idea of personal change because we think that we have to sacrifice something to give something up. But human beings at our best are so inventive and creative and ingenious. And I think that when we use love and compassion as our guiding principles, we can create, develop, and implement systems of change that are beneficial to all sentient beings and to the environment. Now, I've been a scoundrel in my life. I've been selfish. I've been cruel at times, hard to work with, and ungrateful. But so many of you in this room have given me a second chance. And I think that's when we're at our best, when we support each other, not when we cancel each other out for past mistakes, but when we help each other to grow, when we educate each other, when we guide each other towards redemption. That is the best of humanity. I want to, when he was 17, my brother wrote this lyric. He said, "Run to the rescue with love and peace will follow."
In Los Angeles, police say an autopsy will be performed tomorrow to determine how actor River Pheonix died, the 23-year-old. The case appeared to be consistent, as he put it, with cocaine.
Floor, you can see all of LA, and also there's always this light that comes in the windows. And in the corner of the room was this figure sitting, right? And the receptionist says, that's River. That's River Pheonix. I said, oh yeah. So I started to walk over, and he stood up. And he stood up, and he came around the corner, and he was glowing, and he was brighter than the window. And I was watching this, and I was thinking, this guy. I said, and the first thing I said to him, you know, you're a movie star. You're a major star.
I've been tasting roads my whole life. This road will never end.
I think he was just going to take off to become something amazing.
River's sense of loss, his loneliness, his sweetness, his isolation. I mean, youth can always relate to those things.
River Pheonix was not an actor, but his love was always music.
This song is for River Pheonix.
This day in history, July 28, 1965. President Lyndon B. Johnson announces that he has ordered an increase in U.S. military forces in Vietnam from the present 75,000 to 125,000. Johnson also said that he would order additional increases if necessary. He pointed out that to fill the increased in military manpower needs, the monthly draft calls would be raised from 17,000 to 35,000. This decision to send more troops was regarded as a major turning point, as it effectively guaranteed U.S. military leaders a blank check to pursue the war. Conscription. The draft for the Vietnam War brought with it anxiety and anger to many American households. In the 1960s, once a man reached 18 years old, he would receive a letter from the Selective Service System stating that he was eligible for the draft. The draft was viewed as unequal because the working class man's only choice was to go to war, while the wealthy men would go to college or enlist in the National Guard. By the end of the 1960s, the nation was fed up with the war, and they were angry with how the war itself was being carried out. It wasn't difficult for the working class man or the poor man to understand that they are being disproportionately chosen to die. The Vietnam draft sends an entire generation of young men on the run. You can either choose to play Russian roulette with your life, or you can go off the grid. And even the women who love them also choose to tag along. When your own government is publicly deciding that one man's life is worth much more than another young man's life, it's no wonder that the youth of the era, predominantly poor young men and women,
Turn on, tune in, and drop out.
decide to drop out. If that's the way you're going to treat us, we're not even going to participate in your society. It fuels the entire countercultural movement. These people are looking for a different way to live. They don't want the 9-to-5 grind. They don't want to pay your taxes. They don't want to fight the rich man's war. They're rebelling. They're just saying, we can find a different way to do this thing called life. However, they have to earn a living some way, and at this time, it is quite easy to live off of the grid. Farmers across the nation and across Canada have made an unwritten agreement with the young countercultural hippies of the era. In exchange for cheap labor, only providing room and board, no real paycheck, farmers are welcoming the young, transient, countercultural hippies of the era in droves, singles, couples, whole families. We will keep your identity secret. We will not ask you for an ID. You will not be put on a payroll. You will not pay taxes. But in exchange, you and your girlfriend or your wife, your friends, will work my farm. These people become known as draft dodgers. And essentially, this is what River Jude Bottom's father and mother are doing the years prior to his birth, John and Arlene Bottom. This unwritten agreement with these farmers in need of hands allows an entire generation of youth to remain on the move and secret from their government. Now, I have no opinion on this matter either way. I did not live through it. One side of me, the prideful side of me, likes to think that I would have done what Jerry Cantrell's father did, and that is accept it and go and fight. But at the same time, the other side of me thinks I'd be pretty mad at a government who valued my life less than a rich boy's life. I will just say that I feel lucky that I did not grow up during this generation, because it would have been a very difficult choice and it was a no-win situation. If you took advantage of the farming and went on the run, yeah, it may have been an adventure, but deep down you would have felt like a coward. If you obeyed and went to war, did what you thought was honorable because you had no other choice, you would return from duty with the very same college kids who weren't chosen for the draft because they were born with a silver spoon in their mouth, throwing signs in your face, screaming at you, and spitting on you. I'm very glad that I was never put in this situation. I feel sorry for the generation that was. It was a time of turmoil. The country was torn in two. But out of the ashes of that terrible, terrible war, people became woke. Lots of changes, lots of new ideas, and from the ashes we get River Pheonix. John and Arlene Bottom had landed back in the States in a small cabin on a farm outside Portland, Oregon in 1970, where their first son, River Jude Bottom, was born.
This is the remains of the old house that River Pheonix was born in. They were helping me in peppermint at the time, and we hoed peppermint, we cut peppermint, and basically that's all that we've got left is just the little bit of remains, and then memories, I guess.
How appropriate that a Grateful Dead album was left within the cabin River was born in. In case you're wondering, yes, at this time, River Pheonix is not River Pheonix. He is River Jude Bottom, just like Ruddy Bottom from Faith No More. River from Herman Hesse's novel Siddhartha, a spiritual novel that young people of the era would have definitely read. Jude from the Beatles song Hey Jude, and Bottom because that was his dad's last name. River is born in the cabin in 70 and the draft goes on until 73. John and Arlene, ever transient, I mean, if it tells you anything, the way they met was...
Reportedly, River's parents, John Bottom and Arlen Dunitz, met in the late 60s when Arlen was hitchhiking in Los Angeles and John picked her up.
I think the start of it was when they were doing the draft and he wanted to get out of the draft, and I think he went to Canada, kind of running on the road, so to speak. I think that kind of what propelled him into maybe the hippie life or something like that, moving from place to place.
It was a time when many younger people were looking for a new and different kind of life. Some wanted to change society. Others just wanted to drop out.
Perhaps it was the Vietnam draft that brought this generation together, seeking a different way of life, or perhaps it was the LSD released by the CIA in the 50s that opened their minds. More than likely, it was a combination. This was a period of time where people were looking for something totally different, and the weirder the better. No idea should be shunned. No question is a stupid question.
Like I say, we had a house full. We had 6 or 8 people here at all times, you know, and couples and singles and what have you, you know, and some of them be sitting out here under the trees looking at the sun, you know, and just crazy, stupid things. But I think they were just trying something different. I don't understand it. I guess that was the era when they decided, well, what we were doing wasn't the greatest thing, so they were doing other things.
One thing they could all agree on was that they wanted to get back to a simpler way of life, a time when community members cared about one another and depended on each other. This leads to hippie communes all over the United States, so John and Arlene knew that they could just take off, and it wasn't necessarily about the destination, it was about the journey. They would land safely somewhere. For the farmer, Roy Nance, he was very, very worried about them, and especially worried about their newborn babies.
They pulled out of here and went their separate ways. A few of them leave here, a few of them there, and I wanted John and his wife to stay. And with the little one, because it was winter coming on and their old VW bus didn't run, I just didn't want them to leave because I was afraid the little one would never make it.
Moving around often exposed me to a lot of different lifestyles, different people, different atmospheres. Learning to adapt in these new situations, you know, stand out as being, you know, the awkward new boy in town.
The Pheonix family isn't exactly known for opening up about their personal lives, especially the early years, when they were moving from town to town, state to state, even country to country. What we do know is from 1970, when River is born, to 73, John and Arlene are working for Farmer Roy. They have a cabin and everything they need: food, clothing, shelter. The basic necessities of life. But something significant happens in 1973 that allows John and Arlene to pursue other needs, such as the need to feel respected and accepted within your community, the need to have a purpose, the pursuit of happiness. In 1973, the Vietnam War draft ends, leaving John free to come out of isolation and to pursue whatever he feels his life's goals are. As you heard the farmer say, their second child was also born in this year, and he wanted them to at least remain in the cabin throughout the winter. But with the draft gone, John was very eager to yet again be on the move. From 73 up until the time River becomes famous, the family is all over the place, never putting down roots, never settling in a home. To give you an idea of how transient the family was, they leave the safety and security of the farm in 73, right after Rain is born, their second child. In 74, Joaquin is born in Puerto Rico, and then in 76, Liberty is born in Caracas, Venezuela. John Bottom is a man who, although he never abandons his family, he just takes them with him. He does put his needs and desires and his search for whatever epiphany he's looking for ahead of his children's stability. Matter of fact, just a couple years ago, Joaquin joked with Anderson Cooper about how he never participated in normal things kids did because none of the Pheonix children ever went to school. They were never in one place long enough for them to even receive a formal education.
Yeah, it seems very strange to single an actor out. It's so subjective. What's good or, affects you, yeah, it just seems odd. But I didn't grow up, I didn't play sports. I wasn't in Little League. I didn't have any experience with the idea of trophies or the idea of this represents your success. It was never a part of my life.
This is the very reason why John and Arlene pushed their kids into the entertainment industry. The entertainment industry does not require one to have an education. They spent all this time as missionaries going around the world pursuing John's dreams, hopes, desires, and in the end, the children end up footing the bills for their talents. But we'll get to that. So how exactly does a family with little to no resources and no money get around? They did what a lot of other young hippies of the day were doing. They found Jesus and they became missionaries for a cult. No one knows where or exactly when, but at some point after leaving that farm, they ran straight into the Children of God, ran by a leader who called himself Moses, David Burge. Now, no one knows where or when exactly, and the Pheonix family, they're not really known for opening up about their personal lives. But it's not shocking that they would do so. When you have an entire generation of young, naive adults on the run with little to no life experience, who've never held jobs, never paid bills, never planted roots, and these kids are already searching for a different way of life, for someone to take the reins and give them purpose and tell them this is how you must live if you want to be happy.
I think he was always looking for something that he didn't have and found it, with the Children of God and with David Berg.
David Berg was the founder of a Christian sect known as the Children of God.
Remember, a lot of them are also children who have just left home for the first time, and they have spent their entire lives having someone else tell them what to do. That's what they're used to. It's a breeding ground for manipulative, sociopathic predators. People like David Burge come off as sweet, innocent old men like your grandpa. He's got your best interest at heart, and he treats you like an adult, and he lets you do adult things. These kids get wrapped up in these cults for years. They breed with each other, and then they pass that lifestyle to their children. That's how these cults last decades. It's no wonder that the Vietnam draft era coincides with an enormous rise of cults.
The system's nothing, it's just not worth living for. There's love here, there's nothing out there. So let's get it together and show them. Amen. Show them we love you. Amen. Amen. Show them Jesus loves them.
The Bottoms became missionaries for the cult, converting strangers on street corners and raising funds.
Somewhere along the way, John and Arlene crossed paths with the Children of God. Their leader, David Berg, who would become known to his members as Moses Berg or Mo David, realized, again, these are young, naive children that have little to no life experience and they have no purpose. They're just sort of aimlessly wandering around, grouping up here and there. I could go around and collect all of them and give them purpose. This is why cults were so prevalent in the 60s. Also, quick note, what we refer to as the 60s is not really the 60s. It's the very late 60s and the early 70s. So whenever you hear someone referring to the 60s, they're actually talking about the period of time during the Vietnam War draft, 64 to 73. The countercultural events that transpired were a direct result of the draft. Subtract the draft, and that countercultural movement probably would have never happened. River Pheonix's parents must have really jumped in feet first into this Christian sect, because it's not long before John is sent to Caracas, Venezuela, granted the title Archbishop of the Caribbean and Venezuela, and I believe Brazil, and he is now in control of his own branch of the Children of God. They go to South America to recruit new members.
River spent his early years on the road in Latin America. He wasn't River Pheonix then, he was River Bottom. His parents, John and Arlen Bottom, were missionaries for a Christian cult called the Children of God. River's dad, John, held the grand title Archbishop of Venezuela and the Caribbean. They went wherever God sent them: Mexico, Puerto Rico, Venezuela. It was an unsettled existence. They had no friends, no home. Often struggling to make ends meet, they trusted in God to provide. Actually, it was often River.
You ever hear a comedian or an old man or whatever make the joke, "I had a full-time job since I was 5 years old"? Well, for River Pheonix, it was true. His childhood was gone when he hit Caracas. He was 6 years old. He already mastered guitar, and he realized that his parents were not going to provide. His father, John, had developed a taste for alcohol, which would become a lifelong problem, a lifelong addiction, and his parents did not believe in having a job. They were often out doing what the cult called love bombing, and we'll talk about that later. So this is when River Pheonix takes it upon himself to provide for his siblings. He takes over the paternal role of the family. He hustles on street corners, he begs, he panhandles, but mainly he does the only thing he's ever been taught to do. He entertains. To get a potential convert to drop their life and follow you, you really have to make a very charismatic impression. You have to make them believe that this is the bee's knees. This is what's going on. River had been exposed to this type of manipulative behavior his entire life. He knew how to make people comfortable. He knew how to impress people. He knew how to make them laugh. He knew how to make an impression.
At the age of 5, he and his younger sister Rain were busking on the streets to feed the family.
I'm not sure that he was all that great of a singer, but when he was a little kid, he was a great entertainer. While his little sister was out kind of working the crowd, I think on the streets where they had been trained, she would be going around asking for money.
This is where he's really honing his skills for entertaining people. He was not sent to school. He knew nothing about a formal education, so he used the skills that he had to ensure that his brothers and sisters were fed, while his parents are off doing what they're doing, and we'll talk about it later. Even a priest that had befriended the Children of God once told John and Arlene,
while in Caracas, the family befriended a Catholic priest who tolerated their cult.
They lived begging, and they lived making contacts with people and getting donations of food or money or whatever from other people. And I brought up them a few times, you know, if a couple of you guys just get a job, you could probably support the other people, and they wouldn't go into that.
From a very young age, River holds the weight of a father's burden on his shoulders, and this would be a reoccurring theme throughout his entire life. His parents never really took care of him. He always took care of them and his siblings.
River was the leader of a kind of a merry band of feral children. It was his idea to perform on the streets to get money to send the kids to school. He was the one that led the family into vegetarianism. He was the one who wanted them to go in show business, because in show business you could make money without any kind of formal education, without having all the benefits of everyone else. He was the leader of his group, including really basically his mother and his father.
You know, it's been said that a picture is worth 1,000 words. Nothing is more telling about River Pheonix's life than this picture. Notice that at first appearance, it seems like they're all riding bicycles, and yes, this is from later after River has appeared in Stand By Me. He has accumulated some money and the family is doing well financially, but if you look all the way to the left, you see River is actually on a motorcycle and his little sister is on the motorcycle with him. I hate to be so blunt, but this picture tells me exactly what I have found out about River Pheonix's life. He was the dad. The rest of them were the children who looked up to him and depended on him. He was robbed of his childhood by his own father and his eccentric ideals. In John Bottom's quest to find whatever he was looking for, he forgot to take care of his children. He put his own wants, needs, and desires ahead of his children. And this is not just something I'm saying. River would speak to it with friends, with directors later in his life.
But River's early years would leave their mark.
He told me he suffered from the upbringing. I guess part of his, vulnerability and fragility, which is also part of which why he's a good actor, is maybe due to that background. You can become strong because you have this kind of tough childhood, or you can get obviously traumatized.
And later, this childhood burden would manifest itself in drug addiction. River Pheonix went straight from very early childhood to adulthood. So what was it that John and Arlene were so busy doing while River was on the streets of Latin America ensuring that his brothers and sisters ate every day?
Only families within the faith would survive Judgment Day, according to David Berg's creed. The children of God called their mission love bombing, a flirt with God.
Did you notice that the young man speaking has his arm around a young blonde girl and he is trying to recruit a young man? David Berg, leader of the Children of God, slowly over time introduced more and more provocative ways of recruiting new members. One of these ways was to introduce males to pretty young girls, and if they could not get them to join just by giving their sales pitch, then they would offer the girl for sexual purposes. David Berg brainwashed his members into believing that this type of prostitution was okay because sex was a way of sharing God's love, and that if the only way to get someone to understand how great God's love is to offer them a young woman, then that was okay. Through this experience, they would then find the love of God. They called it love bombing. They called it flirty fishing. This is something that the women of the cult were okay with. Most couples were swingers anyway. David Berg even took it so far as to say that it was okay for women to prostitute themselves for monetary gains if it benefited the cult, their Christian sect, because the more financial resources they had, the more love they could spread and the more people they could recruit and take care of. He even went as far as to say if a woman refused to go flirty fishing, should something happen to her, like say she was raped and murdered, it was her fault because she was not paying her tithes to God. A tithe, the way I understand it, is you take a percentage of your income, you give it to your church. So these young, often attractive women of the group would willingly participate in sexual activities because they believed that they were spreading the love of God. And of course, any money gained from prostitution was not to remain in the pocket of the woman who did it. If she did not give up that money to the church, to headquarters, then the same result could happen. She could be raped and murdered, and it'd be her fault. By the way, the pictures I am showing you on screen are illustrations from David Berg himself. He often liked to send out his directives in the form of comic books. This group became highly sexualized, and there's no doubt that John and Arlene would have partaken in this. You may be asking yourself, how could so many men and women willingly do this, let their wives prostitute themselves to strangers, give up their wives to strangers just to recruit new members, and just give all the money that they receive to this guy? Well, he used the Bible to manipulate them. He pointed out all of the greats of the Bible who had numerous wives and concubines and mistresses and often went to brothels. Jesus himself accepted and loved a prostitute. So he said, if they did it, why can't we do it? That's how he got these people to buy into it. Because it involves religion, we call it a cult. But to me, this is a worldwide sex trafficking ring. The very definition of sex trafficking involves the word coercion. Was the person coerced into offering their body? And the answer in this equation is yes. All of the women were coerced. They used a distorted form of religion to coerce them, but it still doesn't change that one one word, coercion. This was a sex trafficking ring. And in case you're wondering, these things were going on long before John and Arlene joined and several years after. But it gets even worse. It wasn't until David Burge took it one step too far that John and Arlene decided we need to get out of here. And that was when slowly David Burge tried to make everybody believe that, well, we're all just children of God. The manipulation is in the name itself. We're all just children to God. So why shouldn't children be allowed to participate in the flirty fishing and the love bombing and things of that nature?
The children of God would later become notorious for their ideas about sex. Teaching that sex was just another way of showing God's love, couples often swapped partners. Children were encouraged to sleep in the same bed as their parents while they made love, and children were to be initiated into sexual practices at the age of 4. Whether River was involved in any sexual practices has never been ascertained.
I did find articles that said River had confided in friends and even one journalist saying he had been abused at the age of 4. The exact age that the creepy pedophile pervert David Burge told his members people became sexually capable. If you continue watching my videos on River Pheonix, you will find that the family has covered up a lot of shame and guilt, and it may have been them actually asking the creators of that documentary to not mention the sexual abuse River went through. It was only then that John and Arlene finally realized what we are being told to do is in contradiction to the Bible.
In Caracas, they threw themselves on the mercy of Father Stephen Wood.
I was at that time pastor of this church and had been a friend of the Children of God for many years. And this family showed up saying that they were leaving the Children of God and needed help. They had decided that they could no longer accept the directions they were receiving from headquarters.
I commend John and Arlene for finally coming to their senses and getting their family far away from the Children of God, but unfortunately for River, the damage had already been done. River did confide in one journalist saying that he was abused at the age of 4. Now, you may be asking yourself, for the parents who were resisting this new directive coming from David Burge to include children, how would these children be left alone with pedophiles? Where do the pedophiles that are mixing within the Children of God gain access to the children? Well, the parents are out love bombing and flirty fishing and begging for whatever they can get and generally being dumbass idealistic hippies. The children would be left at these various hostels under the care of people they named house shepherds, a babysitter. Here is one fine example of a house shepherd in which the families of the Children of God would entrust the care of their children with while they were out having scheduled orgies. And yes, it did come to that. They did end up becoming such a sexualized group that they would schedule events where potential recruits could come and partake in an orgy with the wives and then decide whether they wanted to join the group or not. It was all one big twisted, demented fantasy of an old creepy dude, and when John and Arlene Bottom finally realize this, they throw themselves at the mercy of their friend, the only friend they had outside of the group. They are left penniless, homeless. This friend, the priest, gives them safe harbor. He gives them room and board, and eventually even gets them passage aboard a cargo ship heading to Florida. It is there we will begin part 2 of the tragic life of River Pheonix. I hope you've enjoyed so far. Maybe not enjoyed, but have been informed. We will finish his story in the next video. If you haven't subscribed, please go ahead and do so. Leave me a like if you learned something new. And as always, I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye!